Hi everyone, welcome to Dennis Deep Cut, the 64th installment of this spectacular YouTube channel show installment. Today we're going to talk about the record after the record. Let's see what happens. As a musician, as an artist, there's usually one record that sort of defines you as an artist, defines your career, sets you off a different trajectory, all those things. Today I'm going to talk about a couple of records that made bands what they are, and those records are forever and always going to define them as the people that they are. And I'm going to talk about the record after that. The record that no one really talks that much about, the record that's kind of being overshadowed by the record. So I'm going to talk about the next record. And that's the whole premise. I'm going to show you some of these fantastic breakthrough records or important records, and I'm going to show you their next record and say, this is also a great record, you should check it out. That's what we're doing today. Let's start with the record that inspired this entire list. Sometimes when a band has that record, the record, it doesn't necessarily translate into sales or even ended up on the top 10 lists at that point. But 30 years down the line, 40 years down the line, people still talk about that record as an inspiration, and it's groundbreaking music, and it defined genres and so on and so forth. I am, of course, talking about the first Suicide record from 1977. Suicide started in the early 70s in New York. Martin Rev and Alan Vega. Martin Rev did primitive drum loops from drum machines and played all the synthesizers, and Alan Vega was the insane confrontation crooner. This record is a masterpiece. It is one of the best records to ever come out, I think. And it holds the nucleus of so many music styles, like industrial music and synth pop and post-punk and everything. And it's fantastic. It's stark, it's violent, it's confrontational, it's weird, just fantastic. Of course, not much happened when they put this record out, and a couple of years later, I got signed to a new record label, and they brought in a big name producer, Rick Ocasek from the Cars, to produce their follow-up, aptly titled Alan Vega Martin Rev. And I just love this record. When people talk about Suicide, they don't often talk about this record, but I love it. It's bigger than the first one. It's way more produced. It's poppy at times. It has super cool hooks. It still has that weird, propulsive, hypnotic nature, and it still feels kind of dangerous and wild. Songs like Money, Fur Coats, and Champagne, or Fast Money Music, or Harlem, just killer tracks. If you love the first Suicide record, I recommend you go out and check out the second one, because I think it's up there. I think it's... The last couple of years, I've been obsessing over this record, and that's the reason why I'm doing this episode. I love rock documentaries when they talk about how grunge came and killed like hard rock and hair metal. It's just quite a joy. I have to say that one of the biggest bands in the grunge movement is one of the bands that they weren't necessarily as radical as the other bands, and they still had a lot in depth to like classic rock, which I think for a lot of people sort of bridged the gap between like the 80s and the 90s, and that band is of course Pearl Jam. Pearl Jam was more so than the other bands, like rooted in sort of classic rock, but with a new edge, like a punk attitude, and just different. Debut album 10 came out in 1991, and it spent 5 years on the top 200 Billboard list, and it sold millions and millions of copies. And granted, it's a pretty fucking fantastic record. I mean, so many hit singles came out of this record, and it's just like one of those genre-defying records once again. So what do you do when you're that type of band and you're thrown into stardom and you're thrown into like the whole world, whole world saying like now you're the biggest band in the world? Well, 2 years later, in 1993, they put a Versus, Pearl Jam Versus. They refused to do videos. They refused to. They were in the big fight with Ticketmaster, and they were like trying to show people that we're not just another pop band. We're not just, sellouts selling millions of albums. That being said, this record, when it came out, was the fastest selling record. The first week, it sold the most record of any record in the world or something like that. It's a weird thing. And critics liked it enough, but it's not really a record that we talk about that much in Pearl Jam's discography. I really like it because I think the sort of like the aggression of it and the sort of antagonistic nature of this record makes it quite interesting. You could tell that they're fighting everyone. It's an angry record and it's a loud record and it sounds like it's recorded live almost. And there are parts where Eddie Weatherall screams his voice out on the take. You can hear it, and it doesn't have the amount of hits that 10 had. 10 was like 11 songs and like 8 of them were like top 10 hits. I'm paraphrasing, but this one has songs like Go, Daughter were hits, and then Rear View Mirror, which is probably my favorite Pearl Jam song of all times. I think this makes for a more interesting record. I think the idea of like how to deal with like the stardom, how to deal with being big, and then having this sort of antagonistic nature to it makes it a really interesting record. It's a little bit all over the place, which I love. So Versus with Pearl Jam, definitely a pretty killer record. Let's stick around in the 90s for a little bit. Another band that really came along and just made up a genre of music, and I don't think anyone was prepared for the attack and onslaught that was Rage Against the Machine. Loud, heavy, funky, rap, super political. It makes no sense. To this day, it makes no sense that that's got to work. But it did. And this record, when it came out, it was such a statement. And it made the entire world, a lot of frat bros everywhere start rapping and playing heavy riffs, which was not great when you're out playing shows and every support band is just like a rap rock band of the early 90s. However, they were fantastic. I remember early 1992, just as the record came out, me and a bunch of friends traveled down to Stockholm to see Rage Against the Machine because it was Zack from Inside Out's new band. We thought Rage Against the Machine was fine, but it was Zack, so we wanted to see Zack play, and between the Rage song, we were just screaming like, play No Spiritual Surrender, and Inside Out song. But the show is great. The show made us believers, and it was so powerful, and it's so good. And there was like 80 people at the show. It's like right before they took off. And this record is pretty fucking phenomenal. What do you do when you need to follow that up? Well, 3 years later, Evil Empire. 4 years later, actually, Evil Empire comes out. 1996. 4 years of becoming total superstars when you just want to be this political outfit, and a lot of internal fighting. But I love this record so much. I think it sounds better than the first record. It's even louder. It's even heavier. And I mean, you have songs like People in the Sun, Bomb Track. You have Vietnam, one of my favorites, Rolling Down Rodeo. And I think a lot of places this record ventures into something really noisy and really aggressive and really heavy that it doesn't have on the first record. I think like the rap rock is maybe not as defined, and it just sounds like a really aggressive, confrontational record. I think that politically, of course, both records are really in your face, but I think musically, Evil Empire is even more in your face than the first record. Don't get me wrong, love the first record. Evil Empire, I love Evil Empire, Battle of Los Angeles, I pretty much love that record as well. But yeah, what a record, what a follow-up. It's so loud, it's so fucking in your face. Rage Against the Machine. Let's do something completely different now. Let's talk about a band that put out a couple of records, and then on the third album, they did a record that now is regarded as one of the most important records of the 60s. I am, of course, talking about Love with Forever Changes, one of the best 60s records, one of the best records of all time. I did a list where I talked about like just records you need to own, and this is on that list. Love started in Los Angeles in the 60s. They got signed to Elektra at the same time as the Doors got signed, but Love was the cool band with super hipster Arthur Lee on vocal duties. They put out 2 records that were like kind of garage rocky, almost precursors to punk rock. And then their third album, Forever Changes, from 1967, is like a bona fide masterpiece. It's lush, lavish, these wonderful arrangements, and it's one of the best records ever made. And when people talk about Love, they talk about this record and maybe the first 2 garage rock records, but no one ever talks about what happened afterwards. And to be fair and honest, what happened after this is not as good as this, but it's pretty fucking good, and we need to talk about that. Brian McLean, which was like the other main guy of Love, left after Forever Changes. And when this record came out, it made a little bit of dent on the charts, but Arthur Lee didn't want to tour, so not much happened. And then Brian McLean left, and Arthur Lee kicked the rest of the guys out of the band, and he sort of formed a new Love. And in 1969, they put out the For Sale. I assume is some sort of pun on being for sale or something. And then they also put out a record called Out There in 1969 as well. And while this is not Forever Changes, it's still a phenomenal record. Completely new lineup, but it sounds great. It's not as garagey as the early days, and it's not as orchestral and lavish as Forever Changes, but it's still a fantastic record. Arthur Lee's songwriting is great. I mean, Cowboy Dream, August, Always, See Your Face. All 10 songs are good, and the arrangements are super cool. The playing is loose and free and fantastic. And I think we should talk a little bit more about the post Forever Changes records. That's what I'm thinking. I think For Sale is great. I think Out There is great. You just need to check those records out. If you like Love, you should check out these records as well. That's all I'm saying. It's not as good as Forever Changes, but it's pretty fucking great. I think if this record would have been just like a 60s record without Love connected to it, it would have been regarded as a classic. That's just what I think. What do you think? What's your favorite Love record? Let me know in the comments below. Let's talk about one of those records that came out, and it was like the coolest debut album of all time, and it's since become one of those like reference records in regards to punk or post-punk or just alternative music in general. I am, of course, talking about Wire's first record, Pink Flag, from 1977. This is a fantastic record. Tight, economical. It's like 21 songs in 36 minutes. And it's quirky and weird, and it's really sparse. It's like you could hear everything as it's being played. And this record is great, and it's one of those records that's like, you know, whenever you see a list of like the 100 best 70s records of all time, this is on there. But what does Wire do? They don't want to be a punk band. They don't really care about any of that. So 1978, they put out Chairs Missing, their second album, and it's also has a lot of songs on it, but all of a sudden, the songs are longer, the arrangements are a bit lush, they have keyboards, they have a lot of textures, and it feels like almost the opposite. I mean, there's still a lot of DNA from Pink Flag on this record, like with the wiry sort of approach to it, but it's a very, very different record, and it's also a masterpiece. It's like one of those records that's like defines genres, but it's also like everything that a cool post-punk band wants to be. It's Chairs Missing, and yeah, I think both these records are great. They're very different from each other. And I remember when I was a punk and I bought Pink Flag, and then I bought Chairs Missing, and at first I was like, I don't know what this is, because it's so different, because Pink Flag is so tight and it's so fast, and it's just, you know, really punkish, and this is just something completely different. And I'm truly fascinated by this, and it's a wonderful, wonderful record. I can't recommend enough. All right, let's do one more record, and this is one of my favorite pop records of all time, Lemonheads, It's a Shame About Ray, from 1992. Lemonheads, of course, started in Boston in 1985, and they put out 3 records on Tang Records. And Evan Dando, which is like the Lemonheads guy, in the early days, he had a partner called Ben Daly, and they shared like vocal duties. But when he left, Evan Dando sort of revamped Lemonheads into a pop band, and they put out their first major label debut, Lovey. Before this, didn't really do much, and then It's a Shame About Ray comes out, and it's one of the best pop albums of all time, and people loved it. And then a couple of months after that, they put out the Mrs. Robinson video, and then that ended up on the record, and the record just took off, and Lemonheads became like the band of the early 90s. And it's a great record. And then a year later, Common Field of Lemonheads comes out. And it's interesting because there's a way how Evan Dando sort of construct his melodies, which is so simple and familiar. So it's like every time I hear one of his songs, I'm like, oh, I've heard this before, but you haven't. But it's like the language that he uses is so familiar and is so fantastic. And I would say that, I mean, this record did fine when it came out, but it's not talked about in the same way as It's a Shame About Ray. It's a Shame About Ray is short, it's tight, it feels very precise. Common Field of Lemonheads, it's a bit sprawling, it's a bit all over the place, it's a longer record, it's way more songs. But I would say that every song on this record is as good as anything on It's a Shame About Ray. I completely adore this record. And if I said that It's a Shame About Ray is one of my favorite pop records, then I would also say this is one of my favorite pop records. I like the idea that It's a Shame About Ray. It feels very concise, and this feels a bit all over the place, which makes it much more interesting. But it's also the fact that the songwriting is spectacular. Yeah, I love this record. Listened to it yesterday, it made me so happy. Such a cool record. And there you have it, 12 records, 6 acts that followed up the album with a pretty killer record. I'm sure there's a bunch more. What's your favorite band that put out the record that everybody loves, but then the next record you're like, oh, that's kind of the cool record actually. Let me know in the comments, and maybe I'll do another list like this in the future. I had a couple of records that I wanted to include, but apparently one of them I didn't have on vinyl. It's super frustrating. Yeah, anyway, thank you for watching, and thank you for being a part of this. And until next time, stay wild, my friends. Bye-bye.